Tonight is the evening or the eve of Chavdaled Iyar. We are concluding now Tiferet Shebeyesod, and we are going back to our Maimar in Parshas Emor, and it's a very good Maimar also as a preparation for Shavuos. Actually, Matan Torah is mentioned here in the Maimar. And as we are purifying and sanctifying ourselves towards Kabbalas Torah, towards Matan Torah, we are learning the Maimar V'nikdashti b'soch b'nei Yisrael in Parshas Emor, first Maimar. And we had a few questions as we reviewed last time. What does it mean when Nikdashti, that I should be sanctified in the midst or in Bnei Israel, in the children of Israel? This is one thing regarding Kedusha, holiness. What about the three groups of angels, of Malachim? Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. What about the Nazir, the Nazirite that is growing his hair, is not allowed to cut his hair? How Kedusha is connected with hair? Then we had another two questions. One is how come Srafim omdim mimalo, that the Srafim, even though they are high Malachim, they are creations. How can it be that they are standing mima'al Shechina when they are creations, finite creations? And the last question was, Ki imcha mekor chayim, with you is the source of life, why not you are the source of life? And we learned about the concept of Kedusha, of why we call Hashem Kadosh, because the way He creates and animates the world is in a manner of being transcending creation and not being invested in creation the way the neshama is invested in the body and therefore is affected from the occurrences of the body. So we are now on page 62, and it's the Ois Gimel of the Maimar, which we did about half of that paragraph, of that side, of the right side of Ois Gimel. And we learned there, basically summarizing that this chayus that we call, the life force that we call Memale Kol Almin, the chayus, the life force that is invested in the world, is only a radiance and only a ray and a ziv from the Shechina. But he himself is kadosh umuvdal. He is not invested and enclosed, God forbid, in the world. And even though, and even, not even though, and that's one, and even that chayus, that is drawn from him to enliven the world, the main aspect of that life force that is designated to create and animate the world, this as well is not invested and enclosed in the world and is called Sovev Kol Almin. That radiance that is the energy from which everything is alive, that too, most of it is not revealed and is not enclosed in the world and therefore not perceived. And we call it Sovev Kol Almin. And this is what we explained, that the chayus, the vitality with which Hashem animates the world, is not identical to the way the soul animates the body. Because Hashem animates the world even though he is not invested and enclosed in the world. He affects the world in a manner of sovev umakif, of encompassing and transcending the worlds. And the He'ara, the radiance that is drawn from him in a manner of memale kol almin, that is invested in the worlds, is only a ray from the sovev kol almin. And it's called the ziv of the Shechina, the ray of the Shechina. And since this is the case, that it's not that Hashem himself is invested in the world, and even the light of Hashem that is meant for world is not invested, most of it is not invested in the worlds either. Only a small radiance of that is invested and perceived by the world's vessels. So from that we conclude that how it makes sense that creation doesn't affect a change on God himself at all. Unlike the soul, that when it animates the body, it does get affected by the different occurrences of the body. Why? Because the soul itself, even though in some ways and in many Maimarim you see that this too is a ha'ara from the soul, but it's another, but whatever it is, that the soul is the way it animates the body, it is affected. Unlike God, who is not affected at all by creating and animating the worlds and what happens in the world. So another thing that we learn in the beginning of the Maimar, that since when we talk about, please mute yourself, since when you talk about sovev kol almin, we don't talk about rosh, toch, and sof. You don't talk about the beginning, the middle, and end. There's no ischalkus, there's no division. So we can imagine that the same applies to the Ora Sovev, and that little radiance of light that is invested and enclosed in the worlds, that aspect, memale kol almin, is divided two levels. Now, another thing that we need to understand from the fact that now we understand that the way Hashem creates and vitalizes the worlds is not in a manner of islabshus, is not in a manner of being invested and enclosed. That means that the way the energy and vitality and life force comes from Hashem to the worlds cannot be through a system of a gradual descent. An example of that in a matter which is called in Chassidus Ila ve'alul, cause and effect. It cannot, the light from Hashem that animates the world cannot be invested in the world, in a manner of cause and effect. Why? Like the example that the Rebbe gives is the relationship between the sechel and the midos. It is the sechel itself that is invested in the midos and affects, the mind affects the midos, the emotions, in a manner of cause and effect. It's a gradual descent in which the higher is invested in the lower and becomes the inspiration for the lower. This is the case when the higher is in relation to the lower. And the higher is in proportion, whatever proportion it is, to the lower. But this is not the case regarding sovev kol almin, regarding the energy of Hashem that transcends world, even though it creates them, even though it animates them, but it's not invested and not revealed to them. That energy, which is not finite and is not tailored and custom made to adjust itself to the worlds cannot be coming into the worlds in a manner of cause and effect, of a gradual descent. This we will focus on today, Be'ezras Hashem. So we will see that really there are two systems of descent. There are two systems of Ashpah. One is called Ila ve'alul, when the higher is in relation and in proportion to the lower, when the giver is in proportion to the receiver. And then there is another level of Ashpah, when the giver is not in proportion, in an incomparable to the receiver, like the Ashpah from infinite to finite. That cannot work in a manner of cause and effect, because you cannot have a gradual Ashpah, through a gradual Ashpah to go from infinite to finite. For that you need to have an Ashpah in a manner of Tzimtzum that is called Cyrus. In fact, the Rebbe says that the Cyrus, which means hair, the Rebbe says that in fact this is the only mashal. We'll see soon. That the Rebbe said this is the only metaphor for this kind of descent of the divine light, the mashal of hair. And we'll talk about that, Be'ezras Hashem. But bottom line, we had a relatively a long discussion about Ani Havai Lo Shanisi, I Hashem who transcends, not mislabesh, not adjusted and not affected, and doesn't change. I do not change. I am the same before the world is created, after the world is created, just as I am before the world is created. Now this that we learn that it says Elokim Chayim Umelech Olam, living Elokim and the King of the world, that means that the name Elokim, Elokim Chayim, Elokim of life, that is the aspect of divinity from which life comes to creations in a manner of islabshus, in a manner of being invested and enclosed in the pnimius, in the kelim, in the vessels of the makablim, of the worlds. And therefore Elokim, the name Elokim, that represents Memale Kol Almin, is Leshon Rabim, Yud Mem. When the Hebrew word ends with the Yud Mem, it denotes most of the time it's plural. So Leshon Rabim, because there's a ribui, myriads of divisions of Chayus according to the levels and the kinds of Nivraim. Please mute yourselves. And this is the term Elokim Chayim, but that means that the Chayus, life, comes from where to creations? From Melech HaOlam, from the King of the world. That means from the Midas HaMalchus, the sphere of Malchus. As it says, Malchus Cha, Malchus Kol Olamim. It says in Tehillim, Kuf Mem Hei. Your Malchus is the Malchus of all worlds. And from there, it is only from Malchus, in this case we're talking about our worlds, Malchus of Atzilus, come all the world, the created worlds. And from Malchus, it's only from Malchus that from there you can have Seder Ishtalshelus, an order of descent, of devolvement of worlds, lower and lower, in a manner of Ila and Alul, higher and lower, gradual descent, in which you can see the head, the middle, and the end. As we discussed the way the soul enlivens the body, we have the area of the head, we have the area of the torso, and they have the legs. And so too, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. It's a template that reflects the Ischalkus of the spheros to the Chabad, Chagas, and Nehit. This is where we got to so far. So now we are on page 62, a little bit below the middle of the page, I mean like a third of the bottom, from the bottom, the line that starts, Ma she'ein ken mahuso ve'asmuso izbarach. So that light, which is called Memale Kol Almin, is subjected to division and to levels. This is not the case of Mahuso ve'asmuso izbarach. Hashem himself is kadosh umuvdal, is separate, is exalted and separate. וכמשל, הספשטוס הממשלה והאדנוס של המלך. It's like the analogy of the extension of the rulership and the mastery of the king. The authority of the king, the way it is extended on his entire kingdom. So the rulership and the master of the king on all the על אנשי המדינה שבממשלה זו, on all the people of the land under his kingdom, הוא מנהיגם ואימסו עליהם, he leads them, and the fear of the king is upon all the subjects. הרי עצמוס המלך אינו נתפס באנשי המדינה, רק שמו לבד נקרא עליהם, והוא ממשלתו ואימסו. And the way the relationship between the king and the subjects is that it's not that the king himself is found among the people of his kingdom. It's only the name of the king that is called upon them, and it's the name of the king that rules everyone, and the name of the king that what casts fear on everyone, upon everyone, and awe upon everyone. It's not the king himself. וכמו כן יובן למעלה, and the analog will be understood the way it is above in godliness, שחיוס העולמוס הוא נמשך ממידס מלכוסו יתברך, that the life force of all our worlds is drawn from the midah of malchus of Hashem, שמבחינס מלכוס נמשך להיות מספשט ומסלבש החיוס בגימל עולמוס הנ"ל, גן עדן העליון ותחתון ועולם הזה. That it is from Malchus, in this case Malchus of Atzilus, is coming, the life force comes to be extended and invested in the three worlds of the higher Gan Eden, which is Bria, and the lower Gan Eden, which is Yetzirah, and this world, which is Asiya. וגם באמס מובן ממשל המלוכה, שבחינס האיסנסוס הוא בחינס מקיף וממעל לאנשי המדינה. And also in truth you can see from this analogy, from this metaphor of the king, the human king, that you can learn about the way Malchus of Atzilus affects our worlds, that it is done in a manner of isnasus, of being exalted and being encompassing and being transcending and above the people of the king. And so too, וכך בחינס מלכוסו יתברך, היא בחינס סובב ומקיף על העולמות. So too, the Malchus of Hashem, even Malchus of Atzilus, is סובב ומקיף. Even though it's the source of life of all our worlds, of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, all three created levels of consciousness of the soul as well. But all this Malchus, which is the source of that, is still in a manner of Kadosh as well. Is still in a manner of transcending and encompassing the worlds. And it's רק זיו והערה ממנה. It's only a radiance from Malchus. Only a ray of Malchus. נמשך להיות מסלבש בעולמות. It's like the name of the king is not the king himself. It's the name of the king, the authority of the king is invested, is affecting the subjects. And so too, it's not directly Malchus of Atzilus that is invested in Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya. It's just a radiance of it that is invested in the world, in the created worlds. Vehu inyan ziv hashchina. And that's the inyan of the ziv, the ray, the glory of the Shechina, the radiance of the Shechina, shenimshach liyos koach hapoal banif'al mamash. Only that is now drawn to be a power that is the creative power that is invested in creation. ואז שייך סדר השתלשלוס אילה ועלול. And only now you can talk about an order of evolvement or devolvement of cause and effect, of a gradual descent. וכמו שנסבאר לאל, דאפילו בחינת שמו, שהוא מלכוסו, הוא נשגב לבדו. As it's explained before, that even the name of God, for sure God himself, but even his name, which is Malchus, is still nishgav levado, is still by himself, by itself and exalted. רק הודו של שמו על ארץ ושמיים. It's only a glory, a radiance of the name of God that is present in the earth and the heavens, in the spiritual and the physical worlds. וזהו, and this is אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש. You are holy, and your name, in this case Malchus, is holy. Even your name is holy. Even your name is still Kadosh. Now we know that Kadosh means not mislabesh, remains soviv. And not mitchalek, not divided. No gradual descent. ובזה יובן עניין ד' רבתי דאחד. This will help us to understand the big Daled of the word Echad. When we say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, the Echad ends with the big Daled, שרומז למידס מלכוסו יזברך, that alludes to the Midas HaMalchus. Malchus is represented by the Oz Daled, Malchus of Atzilus, בכלל Malchus, but specifically Malchus of Atzilus, כנודע אזנון, ואם כן, צריך להבין מה שכתוב אחר כך, ברוך שם כבוד מלכוסו לעולם ועד. If the Daled of the word Echad at the end of the first pasuk of Shema alludes to the Malchus of Hashem, why do we say afterwards the second pasuk, which again alludes to Malchus, and we say Baruch Shem Kvod Malchuso Le'olam Va'ed? Why again we are mentioning the Malchus of Hashem? הלא כבר נרמז עניין מלכוסו בדלת רבסי דאחד. Isn't it that Malchus was already hinted by the big Daled of Echad, of the word Echad? אך העניין כי הדלת רבסי דאחד הוא רומז על בחינת עצם מידס מלכוסו יזברך שהיא למעלה מאסלאפשוס בביאה. But the difference is between the Daled of Echad and the Baruch Shem Kvod Malchuso, if Malchus, or the second pasuk is that the Daled, the big Daled, the Daled Rabasi, that hints on Etzem Midas Malchuso, of the Midas Malchus itself. Malchuso, Malchuscha, the way it's still part of Atzilus, a part of godliness, which is higher than being invested and enclosed in Bria Yetzirah and Asiya. Velachem, and therefore, הדלת סיטרין, מזרח ומערב, צפון ודרום, הם בטלים שם במציאות שאין שם ישחלקוס מעלה ומטה כנ"ל. And therefore, when you talk about the big Daled, that also represents the four directions of east, west, north, and south, you don't have in the big Daled, so the Daled that represents that, but it's a big Daled that is Malchus Cha, the way Malchus is part of Atzilus, and therefore the Daled Sitrin, the four directions, the elements of space and time does not apply in Malchus of Atzilus. It's completely annulled. It becomes one with the divinity of Malchus. So the first Daled, the big Daled of Echad, represents Malchus not the way it is invested in Biyah, in the created world. Malchus, the way it is part of Atzilus, of the 10 spheres of divinity, of Atzilus. And therefore there is no division to time or space. No higher, lower, no before and after. That's the first Dalet. Bchinas Shem Kvod Malchusoi, that we say in the second pasuk of Shema, Inyan Gimel Tevos Elu, hu ma shenimshach haziv mimidas Malchuso Yisbarach, lislabesh besochius haoilamos, bivchinas memale kol almin mamash, koach hapoal banifal. What is the second pasuk of Shema? Again we mentioned Malchus of Hashem, Kvod Malchusoi. Ach bchinas Shem Kvod Malchusoi, we say Baruch Shem Kvod Malchusoi. 3 words. These Gimel Tevos, these 3 words, is how the Ziv, a ray from the Midas HaMalchus of Hashem, of Atzilus, is coming down to be invested in the created worlds, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya, in a manner of Memale Kol Almin, in a manner of being invested and enclosed and divided and subjected to time and space and levels. The creative power, which is called Koach HaPoal Banifal, the way the creator is invested in creation. I'm now on page 62, the top of left column, the middle of the sentence, the middle of the line. ולהיוסן נחלקים בכלל לגימל חלקים. And since the created worlds generally are divided to 3 parts, which are reflected in the 3 parts of a human being, the head, the heart, and the liver, the head, the torso, the legs, also thought, speech, and action, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya, Gan Eden HaElyon, והתחתון והעולם הזה, in terms of where the neshamas are. Gan Eden HaElyon, that's Bria, the higher Gan Eden, the pnimius of Bria, the world of Bria. And then Gan Eden HaTachton, the lower Gan Eden, is where the neshamas are in the inner aspects of the world of Yetzira, of formation. And then we have Olam Hazeh, the way the neshamas are in bodies in this world. Also the neshamas are in Olam Hazeh Ruchni, the spiritual Olam Asiya. So these are the 3 aspects of the Bchinos of Breasiv, Yetzartiv, Asisiv. I created, I formed it, and I made it. Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. על כן באו על זה ג' תיבוס, והן שם כבוד מלכוסוי. Therefore, because the light of Memale Kol Almin, this ray of Malchus that is invested, creates and animates the created worlds, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya, because it's divided to 3 worlds, that's why we say 3 words in the second pasuk. We say first Baruch means to bring down. Baruch, to bring down to what? Shem, Kvod, Malchusoi. We have 3 stages. Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. וזהו פירוש ברוך שם כבוד מלכוסוי לעולם ועד. This is the Rashi Tevos here, the second pasuk of Shema. This is the meaning of ברוך שם כבוד מלכוסוי לעולם ועד. היינו שאנו ממשיכים להיות המשכוס מבחינס ממלא כל עלמין. We are bringing down from that aspect of ממלא כל עלמין. How for Malchus of Atzilus is now becoming the ממלא כל עלמין of Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. When we say ברוך שם כבוד מלכוסוי לעולם ועד, we are actually bringing down from Malchus of Atzilus energy in a manner of memale to be invested and enclosed in the created worlds and affect the worlds in a manner that can be perceived. וזה שכתוב כי עמך מקור חיים ולא נאמר כי אתה מקור חיים. That now we can answer the last question, I think it was, of why it says Ki imcha mekor chaim, and not ata mekor chaim. It says, with you is mekor chaim, the source of life. And why don't we say, you are the source of life, you God? שאז היה משמע שהוא ברוך הוא המקור הנובע ממנו החיים בהשתלשלוס עילה ועלול. We don't say you are the source of life, because then it would mean that God, Baruch Hu, blessed be Him, is the source from which life descends in a manner of a gradual descent of cause and effect. That cannot be. וזה לא ייתכן כלל. This cannot be possible at all. Kanal, as we said before, because for infinite to finite, you cannot go gradually. שלא היה באפשר להיות נמשך מאיתו יסברך סדר והדרגס השתלשלוס עילה ועלול. It would not be possible to draw from him, Yisbarach, him himself, an order, a gradual order of devolvement of cause and effect. כי אילו היה נמשך השפע ממנו בבחינס עילה ועלול, לא היה כלל יסהבוס האולמוס בבחינס גבול ומידה. Because if the divine flow would directly come from God in a manner of cause and effect, then it wouldn't be possible at all for worlds for limited finite worlds to be created. לכך נאמר, therefore, the pasuk says, כי עמך מקור חיים. With you is the source of life, not you are the source of life of all worlds. שהמקור שנובע ממנו השתלשלוס עילה ועלול הוא עמך. רוצה לומר שהוא דבר הטפל ובטל אצלך. Therefore we say with you is the source of life, meaning that the source from which the devolvement of the ishtalshelus of cause and effect is imcha, that source is with you, meaning what? Which it's secondary and battle to you. It's insignificant and annulled to you and incomparable to you, to God Himself. Why? ליוז כי מקור זה הוא הנקרא עלמא דיסגליה ונקרא ממלא לכל העלמין. Being that this is incomparable, this type of energy is incomparable to God Himself and therefore cannot directly come from Him, and therefore there it comes from His Malchus, and even that in a way of ara, only a ray, only radiance and light. And this source, this final source that is relating to the worlds, to the vessels of the created worlds, is called Alma Disgalia, the world of the revealed. V'nikra memale kol almin. It is called the light of God that fills all worlds. Shemislabesh besoch ha'olamos b'pnimiyusam. That divine life force is invested in the worlds, in their internalized by the worlds. she'az shayach lomar inyan hishtalshelus ila ve'alul. Then it applies to say that there can be a gradual evolvement of cause and effect. והרי נסבאר שבחינס ממלא כל עלמין הוא עניין זיו השכינה, שהוא זיו והארה בעלמא, וגם נמשך על ידי צמצום עצום בתחילה. So we already got clarity about the fact that the aspect of what we call ממלא כל עלמין, the energy, the divine life force that is enclosed and invested in the worlds, this is called the ziv of the Shechina, the radiance of the Shechina. It's only a radiance, it's only a ray, it's only a light. And even that radiance is drawn into the worlds through a tremendous tzimtzum, a constriction first. שיהיה הגילוי, so even from that light, from God, that light is subjected to a tremendous tzimtzum, that there should be a revelation that is comparable to the worlds, and the relation between that ziv of the Shechina and the Shechina itself is רק כטיפה מאוקיינוס ויותר מכן אין ארוך. It's like a drop of the ocean. So that light that becomes ממלא כל העלמין from the Shechina, from Malchus, is like a drop in the ocean, and that is incorrect, because in a man incomparably so. That means if the ocean, as the Rebbe will say in a moment, if the ocean were infinite, and you would take a drop of the ocean, this is how much is invested as ממלא כל העלמין בגילוי in the worlds. אז אחר כך, only after that tzimtzum, only following that tzimtzum, is נמשך מזה מקור לבחינס השתלשלוס. Only from after that tzimtzum, now you have a source for the השתלשלוס of בריאה יצירה אנסיה. והנה בחינס הזיו הוא תפל ובטל במציאוס לגבי מקורו. This ziv, this radiance, that is the source of all our life, and is enclosed in our vessels, in the worlds, is nullified to its source like the nullification of כביטול טיפה אחת בים אוקיינוס אילו היה הים בלי גבול, על דרך משל. It's like the insignificance, the bitul and insignificance of one drop of water, of a sea, of an ocean, if the ocean, the sea, were bli gvul, were unlimited and infinite, for an example. Or another metaphor, ukevitul ziv hashemesh bashemesh, and like the insignificance of a ray of the sun when it is in the sun. And that's how Memale is battled in Malchus, in the Shechina. It's in God. It's completely battled. Lachen nikra imcha. That answers and makes clear why we say imcha, with you is the source of life, not you are the source of life. Aval hu baruch hu, because he himself, b'mahuso v'atzmuso, in his essence and in relation to himself, muvdal b'vchinas ein aroch lecha. He is separate and exalted in a manner of infinite incomparability. וזה שכתוב, אתה הוא ראשון ואתה הוא אחרון. And this is what is written, we say in Ezras Avotenu, before 18, we say, you are first and you are last. ומבלעדיך אין לנו מלך. And without you we don't have a king. דהיינו אתה, במהוסו ועצמוסו יסברך, הוא מובדל. You, meaning the way God is in relation to himself, he is completely separate. שהוא ראשון והוא אחרון, and therefore he is the first and he is the last without any change. כמו שכתוב, לא שניסי. As we say, as the pasuk says, אני הווי לא שניסי, I do not change. I am the first, I am the last, and there is no change. וחיוס כל העולמוס הוא רק מבחינת מלך. And therefore we say, מבלעדיך אין לנו מלך, we don't have a מלך. The highest of all the worlds comes only from the aspect of malchus, of melech, of kingship. וכנ"ל, as we explain, בפירוש אלוקים חיים ומלך עולם. Only when it gets to the level of Elokim Chaim, of Elokim, of Malchus, then you can talk about, in Melech Olam, you can talk about an energy that is invested in the worlds. הרי מבואר עניין ופירוש קדוש, שהוא לומר שהוא יסברך קדוש ומובדל ומחיה העולמוס שלא על ידי הסלבשוס בסיוחיוסן, על דרך שהנשמה מחיה את הגוף. So, we are concluding now the explanation about what Kedusha means. We began by saying we have to understand first what Kedusha, what Kadosh means. That means that Hashem Yisbarach is Kadosh, is holy and separate, and animates the worlds not through being invested and enclosed in them, like the neshama animates the guf, the body. Like the soul animates the body by being invested in the body, it's not the case by the divine, by God. והגם כי נתבאר גם כן שיש בחינת חיוס אלוקוס המתלבש בפנימיוסן, and even though we did explain that there is a divine life force that is invested and tailored and enclosed in the pnimius of the worlds, and therefore divided and has levels, כמו שהנשמה מתלבשת בגוף, and that aspect, ממלא כל העלמין, is comparable and is similar to the way the neshama is invested in the body and gets affected. אך זהו רק בחינת זיו השכינה. This is only a radiance from the Shechina. He'ara de'he'ara. It is a radiance over radiance. Is a radiance over light. אבל מהוסו ועצמוסו יזברך קדוש ומובדל, but he himself, God himself, is holy and separate and exalted, ואפילו בבחינת שמו, and even his name, which is Malchus, we say נאמר כי נשגב שמו לבדו, that his name is also exalted and holy by itself. רק הודו דשמו, only the glory of his name is found על ארץ ושמיים, is invested in the physical and the spiritual worlds. והוא בחינת הארה דהארה כנ"ל. This is the aspect of a ray over ray, or light over light, a radiance from the light from God. Questions so far? Now we explained so far what Kadosh means regarding God and his relation with worlds. Any questions or comments so far? We finished a Seif Gimel.
I have one thought. It's Abigail.
Yes, Abigail.
First of all, thank you. I never understood this until now. Not that I understand it, but you did such a wonderful job.
Thank you.
But I'm just wondering, where is the ricochet back? Because
where is what?
Where is the ricochet back to the Atmos of Hashem? Because this is just one direction. We'll
get.
Okay, thank you.
Your concern is a very Jewish concern, but we'll get there. A little patience. All right, let's move to Dalet. Now we get to hair. And we begin with the Nazir. Nazir is a Jewish man who took on a level of Nezirus, of being abstaining from consuming wine or grape products. And he is holding on a higher level of holiness, refraining from certain pulls of the world. And he is connecting himself with a high level of godliness, of divinity. And he has to conduct himself in a manner of ובזה יובן מה שכתוב בנזיר קדוש יהיה גדל פרע שיער ראשו. Now we understand what is the connection between Kedusha, between holiness, and a Nazir, a Nazirite. It says about a Nazir that he should be holy. Gadel pera, he has to grow his hair wild, not to cut his hair, not to touch his hair. Se'ar rosho, the hair of his head. צריך להבין מה עניין הקדושה לגידול השיער. We need to understand what is the connection between holiness and growing the hair. אך העניין דהיני כסיב. So now we go into the little Kabbalistic description here. And he is going to quote a pasuk from Daniel. Daniel had a vision, a dream, and in this dream, in his vision, it says in Daniel, he saw Atik Yomin, Yasiv Chulu, Use'ar Reishe Ke'amar Naka. It's Aramaic. Atik Yomin was sitting, and the hair of its head was like clean wool. ופירוש עתיק יומין הוא כמו שכתוב המתנשא מאימוס עולם. What is עתיק יומין? עתיק יומין is keser. עתיק also means detached and exalted and removed. So עתיק יומין means the one that is exalted from the days. עתיק נעתק means detached, above, detached. Yomin means days. So Atik Yomin is, as the pasuk says, Hamisnaseh mi'imois olam, the way God is exalted from the days of the world. What are the days of the world? כי ימוס עולם הוא בחינת המקור חיים המסלבש בבחינת ממלא כל העלמין. What is ימוס עולם? ימוס עולם are the days of the world, the way the six spheros, the six midos of Hashem, of Atzilus, go down to become the source of ממלא כל העלמין, of creating through the six midos. They are now going down to Malchus, and from Malchus to become the source of the 6 days of the week that correspond to the 6 midos. And then the 7 is Shabbos, Malchus. Bivchinas, this is Yemos Olam, the days of the world, is Bchinas Hamakor Chayim, the source of life that is invested and enclosed in a manner of Memale Kol Almin, כנודע בפירוש מה שכתוב ששת ימים עשה הוויה ולא כתיב בששת. It says in Bereshit that 6 days God created the heaven and the earth. It doesn't say in 6 days. It says 6 days. אלא שרומז למידוס עליונוס. It hints and alludes to the divine midos, hamislabshim la'achayos ha'olamos. The 6 days are the 6 midos, chesed, gvura, tiferet, netzach, hod, yesod, that are invested to animate the worlds. Yom Rishon nimshach mibchinas chesed. Sunday comes from the midah of chesed. V'nivreu al yedei ze or umayim. And through midas chesed, light and water are created, and so on. וזהו בחינת ממלא כל עלמין. This is the aspect of the divine energy that is ממלא כל עלמין. אבל מהוסו ועצמוסו יזברך, שהוא קדוש ומובדל, נאמר עליו המתנשא מאימוס עולם. So that's the ימוס עולם is the energy that is invested in the world and is tailored and is limited to the world. That's ימוס עולם. But Hashem himself is mitnaseh mi'imos olam. He is higher than the days of the world. אבל מהוסו ועצמוסו יזברך, שהוא קדוש ומובדל. God himself, who is kadosh and separate, נאמר עליו המתנשא מימוס עולם. About him it says that he is exalted and above the days of the world, שמרומם ומתנשא מלהיות מסלבש בסוכן. That God himself is higher and too exalted to be invested in them, in the world. כי אין ארוך לו כלל, because there is no comparison between the worlds and God. They are totally incomparable to him. וזהו פירוש עתיק יומין. This is the meaning of עתיק יומין, מלשון המעתיק הרים, שנעתק ונבדל מבחינת ימוס עולם. This is the meaning of Atik. Atik is Keser. And in the vision Daniel saw Atik is higher, which means how godliness is higher than Yemos Olam, than Memale Kol Almin, than the source of the life that is invested in the world. skip the parenthesis. והמשכה הנמשך ממנו להיות מקור וחיוס להסהבוס בחינס ימוס עולם ובחינס ממלא כל העלמין הוא רק הערה מצומצמת שאין ארוך כלל למהוסו יזברך. So now, the Hamshacha from God, the way God is called godliness, the way it's called Atik, the way godliness is higher and exalted from the days of the world, from the midos, the 6 midos, the way they are invested, Memale Kol Almin. So when from this infinite, exalted Atik comes now Hamshacha, comes now a flow to become a source of life, to create and animate the aspect of Memale Kol Almin, Yemois Olam, Memale Kol Almin, the worlds, and being tailored to the worlds and being divided to the different levels of worlds and so on. This is only Ha'ara Metzumtzemes. It's only a very limited, minute ray and radiance, light from Atik, she'ein aroch klal lemahuso v'asmuso klal. And that radiance, that little minute radiance that is the source of life of our worlds, is totally incomparable to God Himself. There is no comparability at all. This is finite, this is infinite. ועל זה נאמר, ושיער רישה כאמר חולו. About that, Daniel says that the hair of the head of Atik was like wool, שנמשלה לבקיעס השערה מהמוח. So the hashpah from Atik, from the way godliness transcends the world, from Sovev, to effect, to animate the worlds, to become Memale Kol Almin, so the hashpah from Sovev Kol Almin, from infinite, to Memale Kol Almin, to finite, is now compared, שנמשלה לבקיעס השערה מהמוח, to the breaking through of the hair from the brain. We are talking about the hair that grows on our skull. Really, the hair that grows from our skull begins in our brain. שאם היות שנמשך בשערה חיוס מהמוח, that together with the fact that the hair is a growing thing, that there is chayus, there is a life force, that a vitality or certain life or energy that is drawn in the hair from the brain. Kanoda is known שהשערה חלולה, that the hair is hollow. ובתוך החלל יש יניקה מהמוח. And in the middle of the hair that is hollow, there is like a hollowness in the hair that draws energy from and life force from the brain. That's how the hair grows. עם כל זה, together with the fact that the hair actually grows from the brain. The brain is the most sensitive and alive part of our body. Together with that, הוא רק מוסרי מוחין, it's only from the externalities of the brain, וחיוס מצומצם במאוד, and it is extremely restricted and limited energy, חיוס, עד שאינו נוגע כלל לחיוס המוחין. To the extent that even though there is a little tiny chayus that is invested in the hair, but it is not affecting at all the chayus of the brain, the vitality of the brain itself. To the extent, עד שבהיחתך השערה לא יכאב למוח כלל. That when you cut the hair, it will not pain the brain at all. כך על דרך משל, אי אפשר להמשיל משל אחר לבחינס האור והחיוס הנמשך ממהוסו ועצמוסו יזבח להיוס מקור לבחינס ממלא כל עלמין הנקרא מקור חיים. So too, for an example, says the Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, we cannot find any, it's not often that I at least see that the Rebbe would say that we cannot find any other phenomena, any other metaphor, any other allegory. Usually there are different examples. Here the Rebbe is saying it's not possible lehamshil mashal acher. It's not possible to provide any other metaphor or allegory or example, livchinas haor va'achayos, to the light and the life force that is drawn from God Himself to become a source to the aspect of memale kol almin, which is called makor chayim, source of life. We cannot find any other metaphor to explain how is it that from Atik, that is totally exalted and infinite, would now come out energy that will be so limited and finite that it can be invested in a created world and be tailored to the vessels and the capacity of this world to perceive it. That is an enormous tzimtzum, that an infinite tzimtzum that is not at all possible to happen through a gradual descent of ila va'alul, of cause and effect. And the only example, but rather this is a major tzimtzum here, this is a real thing of a tzimtzum, this is what a tzimtzum is. A real tzimtzum is when there is incomparability between the lower and the higher, between the receiver and the giver. That's a real tzimtzum. When it's infinite, then the difference between the giver and the receiver is infinite. Then the only example that we can give to such a descent of life from the source to be invested in something else is the hair, and the life force that comes, the energy that is invested into the hair from the brain. Yet the tzimtzum of that energy is so enormous that when you cut the hair, you don't feel any pain in the brain. רק כמו בחינת שערה. It's only משל, only example we can give is hair. לפי שמזה המשל מובן, איך שאף על פי שנמשך ממנו הערה זו, עם כל זה הוא next page קדוש ומובדל לגמרי. Because from this analogy, we can understand only to when you compare it to hair, you can understand that how even though such a minute even though ha'ara, such energy does come from God, the energy that is invested in the world, memale kol almin, nevertheless he is still kadosh umuvdal, he is completely removed and not affected by it. Ki ha'se'ara, I'm now on top of page lamed base, I'm almost done. כי השערה אינו נוגע כלל למהוס ועצם המוח, because the hair does not affect at all to the brain itself, על דרך משל. וכך זו ההערה אינו נוגע כלל למהוסו ועצמוסו יתברך, שהוא בעצמו קדוש ומובדל לגמרי, ורק בחינת הערה מצומצמת הנמשלה לסיירוס נמשכת להיות מקור להסהבוס מקור חיים וממלא כל עלמין. It is only this, and so this ha'ara, this ray, is not affecting he himself at all, God himself at all. He himself is holy and separate completely, entirely, and only a very minute radiance that is compared to hair is drawn to from him to become the source of the creation of a source of life, and ממלא כל העלמין. And לכן, and now you see why יש שייכוס עניין הקדושה לבחינת סיירוס. Now we can understand why there is a connection between holiness and hair. דווקא השערה המורה על עניין הקדושה. It is דווקא particularly hair that indicates, the hair of the head, that indicates on the subject, on the matter of holiness, also the hair of the beard, by the way. And that's for many times. Anti-Semites, Hashem Yikom, those who were affected by him, damaged by them, used to attack Yidden by their beards and many times cut their beards and so on, because the hair signifies holiness. Deha beha talia, one depends on the other. להיוסו קדוש ומובדל, אי אפשר ליוס ממנו המשכה רק על ידי בחינת סיירוס דווקא. It is דווקא the hair that indicates the matter of holiness, because one depends on the other. Since you are talking about how godliness is so holy and so separate and exalted, therefore, the only way that some kind of flow will come from God Himself into the world, it is only in a manner of sairos, of hair. It requires such an enormous tzimtzum. ולכן בבחינת סיירוס אלו תלוי הקדושה. Therefore, it is on the hair that holiness depends. The divine holiness, קדושה העליונה. שהרי נמשכו מבחינת קדוש ומובדל, because hair comes from the aspect of God that is called קדוש ומובדל, holy and separate, בחינת סובב כל העלמין, divinity that transcends all worlds, and infinite, שאי אפשר ליוס משם שום המשכה בפנימיוס רק על ידי סיירוס. That from there cannot be any flow that can be internalized and can be enclosed and invested and enclosed in the worlds only through Sairos. And in the person, that comes through the Sairos of the person. מה שאין כן מבחינת החיוס זה ממלא כל העלמין. So we will continue next time. So in order for chayos from kedusha to come down, you need to have a tzimtzum that is expressed in the human body by the hair of the head. And therefore, kedusha is associated, the hair of the nazir is associated with kedusha and cannot be cut. The Rebbe will mention the Levim they are warned to make sure that they have to shave all the hair of the body, and we will get to the hair of the woman, that married woman that needs to be covered. Why the hair of the man doesn't have to be covered, and dafka the hair of the woman has to be covered, and why dafka married woman, and it's all connected to kedusha and the fact to bring down into the world a hashpa from a flow, from an influence, from the level that is called kadosh, holy and exalted. For that you need a tzimtzum, which is hair. You cannot use a gradual system of cause and effect, of gradual ishtalshelus. That doesn't work when you talk about the descent from the infinite to the finite. So next time we will conclude Be'ezras Hashem, next week, the subject of hair and how is that connected to Kedusha, and from that we'll get to the groups of Malachim, of Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. And from that we'll get to Matan Torah, Be'ezras Hashem, and from that we'll get to how we connect to God Himself. Don't worry, Abigail, we'll get to God Himself also.